Hey, everybody. The day is here. I've been planning this event for a little over a month to promote the launch of my book, The Lovable Leader. For those of you that are here, thank you for joining me. For those of you that will be rolling in later or watching the replay, thank you for attending. All right, so this is just the sort of welcoming remarks section. This is where I'm going to talk a little bit about what today is going to be like, the sort of topics we're going to cover, all sorts of different stuff. So, got a little agenda that I'm going to look over to the side every once in a while for and go through a couple things. So, first things first, if you're not aware, the Lovable Leader launched officially today. So, for many of you have pre-ordered and you're wondering, where's my copy? Well, today's the day where it starts to actually ship out because today is the official launch day. It's also available on Kindle. So if you do decide to buy a copy, one, thank you, but also it would be really helpful if you left a 5-star review if you think it's worthy of 5 stars. If you don't, leave whatever review you think is honest. I'm open to hearing all feedback. If it's negative, it's positive. Would love to know. This is my first book, and I got to be honest, I'm not one to generally acknowledge most of my accomplishments in life. I tend to set a goal. I go about trying to achieve it. I either do or I don't. And if I do, I go great. And then I move on to the very next thing. So it's very unusual for me to take any time to stop and pause and acknowledge and appreciate the work that went into something or the accomplishment. This is probably the first thing that I can remember where I am truly unreservedly proud of what I've put together here and the accomplishment of creating a book. So that's, just for me is a really monumental occasion. So I'll tell you a little bit about the book. Just so you know, you can buy it now on every channel, Barnes and Noble, Target, Amazon, it's everywhere. But let me tell you a little bit about, I guess, what the book is about. But let me tell you actually first about what today is about. So I had this idea to have a launch event for the book so that, one, try and make a big splash, get as many people to know about it as possible. But more importantly, I think I really wanted to talk with people who were experts in the different areas that I talk about within the book. So there's a number of different concepts in the book that I talk about. And I wanted to find the people in my network or the people in my extended network who had a deep expertise in this particular area. Today, we're going to be kicking off on the entire event will start at 9:30 after these opening remarks and everything. And my first guest is going to be Chris Lynn. And I wanted to talk to him about the idea of people first leadership. Now, why Chris for that? Well, he has a podcast called Leading People First. So you can see the connection there. I've got Jeanette Branier, who's going to be coming on and talking about care. I've got Robin Dreek, who's going to be talking about trust. He wrote The Code of Trust, an amazing book. I've got Jeff Harry coming on to talk about safe travels, creating psychological safety, and creating an environment where play can happen at work. So I've got this incredible lineup of guests between day one and day two. If you haven't seen the schedule, you can see it at jgibbard.com/event. That'll have both day one and day two. I also wrote a post about it on my blog, which you can see at jeffgibbard.com/blog. So amazing group of people. And the reason I wanted to bring them on was not to talk about my book, because that's silly. Why bring people on to talk about me? I want to talk about them. I want to talk about what they know about. So I'm not bringing these experts on to talk about what they thought of my book or what they found in my book interesting or where it aligns with their work. No, instead, I just want to bring them on to talk about the concept that is included in my book. And then you'll be able to go in and actually read my book and see where the overlaps and the parallels are. And in some cases, where the inspiration came from. So that's kind of what today is about, is bringing on these amazing people and talking to them. It's a full day event. We're going to go from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. First guest starting at 9:30 and the last guest going to be at 5. And then I'll do a couple closing remarks on the day. I am taking a break for lunch because dude's got to eat. And I may take a break occasionally to have a sip of water because it's a long day of talking. You'd be surprised. We do these days of being on Zoom all day with people, and you know how exhausted you are. Imagine hosting a full day podcast. So I'm going to be pretty drained at the end of the day, but thankfully I've got people here that are going to bring out my best energy because they are just such fantastic, incredible, intelligent, remarkable people. And I honestly can't believe that I got the guest lineup that I do today. So hope you're excited about that. So let's talk a little bit about the book. So the Lovable Leader, build great teams with trust, respect, and kindness. Where'd it come from? How did this come about? A lot of people have been asking me about that in my network. They find out that I wrote a book and they're like, wow, what was that like? How did that come together? So my experience of writing a book is probably gonna be a little bit different than a lot of other people, just for the sake of how my brain operates. With ADHD, I have a certain way of working that is counter to what a lot of the authors I spoke to, how they operated, right? So when I talked to a lot of authors about how they wrote a book, they would say, oh, well, I had to write every day and I wrote 500 words a day. So the truth is, this book took me 5 years to write, but it didn't take me 5 years to write. It took me 28 days. It took me 28 days over 5 years because I basically binge write. The very first day I sat down to write this book, I wrote 18,000 words at a clip. It took me a day. I sat down and it all came out. So for me, the process of writing a book was this labor of love of these intense peaks and valleys of intense hyper productive writing, and then these valleys of introspection and reflection and just thinking about what the book would become. And I'm really glad it took me as long as it did because I learned a lot in those valleys between the writing through experience of actually being a leader on different teams and how that showed up. So here's the genesis of the book though. So I had been running my own agency for at that point I think maybe 5 or 6 years, maybe a little longer than that. And my wife and I were taking a trip down to Annapolis, Maryland to visit some friends. And on the drive back, she had started asking me some questions about different scenarios that she was having at work because she had just moved into a new management role. And she had never really been in a role where she had to manage people. So she had a number of different questions, different scenarios, things that have come up, ways of dealing with conflict, things that are going well, things that are not going well. So we just started talking through different things. And in the conversation, what I had acknowledged is that one of the things that she really had going for her that was always going to work in her favor as a manager is that she's exceptionally lovable. She's just a very lovable person. Anybody that's met my wife, Erica, knows this. She's lovable. Um, and it was at that moment that it clicked for me, the lovable leader. And that was where the title came from. And actually, we're still in the car here. We're still talking about things. And I asked her to pull out my phone, open up Evernote, and jot down some of these notes in the outline that I was putting together. So we actually wrote the entire outline on the way from probably somewhere in, Delaware, edge of Delaware, maybe Maryland, until we got back to Philadelphia. By the time I got back, I had an outline. And the very next day is when I sat down to write those 18,000 words. So what is the book about? Why did it come together? It wasn't just the advice for my wife and what she was going through, but it was really a reaction to something that I think I had buried deep inside of me for a very long time. So I'm an entrepreneur. I'm psychologically unemployable, really very difficult for me to work for anybody. And I think one of the reasons why, and when I look back on it, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but I think one is I had a pretty significant amount of work trauma, work related trauma. And I don't mean like really, really difficult, hard, discrimination or anything. I just mean like I had bad bosses. I had people that didn't care about me. I had environments where I didn't feel like I was able to thrive. And especially with the way that I work, I just felt like I wasn't in an environment where I was going to be able to do my best work. And I also got to witness the impact of work on my parents. And I saw how work was for them. And I kind of grew up with this idea that work was like this meme, like this idea of like it's something you're not supposed to like. Your job is supposed to be this drudgery. And yet at the same time, my dad tried to instill in me this idea that if you find something you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. So I've been chasing that my entire life. And every job I found, it just squashed it. It never gave me the opportunity to live that passion, that purpose, that feeling that I was doing something worthwhile. So I'd say at the very start of it, when I started writing the book, what really came out was just a number of different reactions to bad bosses. I thought about all of the bad managers that I had, whether it be, even ones that I had good relationships with. When I watched the way that maybe interacted with others on the team, I'd been taking mental notes for, maybe 10 or 15 years at that point. So I had this entire library of how would a bad boss handle that? And how would I want to handle it in a different situation? If I was in that role, what would I do differently? So really one of the biggest and most profound influences on the book where I started with it was thinking about the opposite, right? So the not lovable leader, the leaders that you leave, the ones that you don't want to follow, right? And instead of building teams with trust, respect, and kindness, they build it on distrust, and they build it without respect, and they're not particularly kind. And I thought about those environments and how do we correct that? And I decided that I really wanted to write a book for new managers, people that are just coming into their very first role where they have to manage people, because I saw that as being the pathway to real change. It's difficult to take somebody who's been in the C suite for the last 15 years and give them a new management model, a new way of thinking about managing their teams. They've gotten there. they're probably pretty set in their ways, at least more so than somebody who's fresh in the role and is trying to think about how they're going to define their leadership style. So I really want to write that book for those new managers because I see that as being the way that we affect change going forward and into the future. So one of the big ones, big influences of the book was bad bosses and bad managers. I would say the next was my parents. I think we're all incredibly influenced by our families, and I had two very different sort of household experiences. My parents divorced when I was like 10 or 11, and I noticed that there was just different ways that I felt in those two environments. My dad's house and my mom's house, and a lot of that really influenced me. And I won't get too deep into that whole dichotomy and how that influenced me, but I'd say that's another influence. As I was going through writing the book, though, I would say one of the biggest influences had to be the collection of books that I've read on the subject of leadership, on psychology, on self improvement and self help, and unlocking potential, and all of these different sort of influences all came together, and that was a big one. I'm just going to call out a few that I think are just incredibly important books that I had read prior to writing the book, and I'm going to give a shout out to a couple books that I've read after writing the book that I think are just fantastic. So consider this sort of your new manager's book bundle that I would recommend. I would say How to Win Friends and Influence People is one of the most important books that anyone can read. I read it early on in my life. I was in my like early 20s. And I got to tell you, it absolutely shifted my perspective in life. I think everyone should read it. Simon Sinek wrote Leaders Eat Last. I think that's another great book. It really teaches you the principles of servant leadership, and it really shows you why that's an important thing to think about. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, another great book on ownership. And one of the things I really liked about that book is I'm not really one to be like super into books about war or military or anything like that. Like that's not my bag. But even though that was sort of the lens that a lot of the lessons in the book were taught through, it really resonated with me because it does such an excellent job of defining what ownership is. Um, Next book on the list is called The Code of Trust. I mentioned this at the top of the welcome, but today I actually have the author of that book, Robin Dreeke, coming on to talk about trust. I cannot even tell you what a big deal that is to me because I actually think The Code of Trust is a book that absolutely everyone should own. And one of the most beautiful things about the book is how it shows you how to build trust tactically. Like, what are the steps to do it? And it shows you why and how it works. And Robin was an ex spy, basically, that helped to recruit foreign spies. I mean, like, dude's background is remarkable, but the book is so beautifully strategic and tactical. And yet at the same time, he's very clear about not using these tactics like for the wrong reasons. You know, he's talking about using it in an ethical way and how leaders can really benefit from it. It's an amazing book, The Code of Trust. Please go buy it. And then Influence by Robert Cialdini, I think is, just an interesting book that helps you to understand why people make certain decisions and what sort of things influence us to say yes and say no. So I thought those were all amazing books, and they really gave me a lot to think about, not always directly as I was writing the book, but a lot of times just kind of in the back of my mind. These are books that I thought were really just really well written and really made beautiful points and gave me a lot to think about strategically and tactically. Now, I want to give a couple others that I think are really, really worth buying that I've read after writing my book. So the first is going to be Good Authority by Jonathan Raymond. This book, if I could have any book to be paired with my book in a bundle that, like, you buy mine, you buy, these two should go together. The Good Authority is basically the companion piece to the Lovable Leader, and does such a good job where I would say that they're kind of a yin and yang to one another, talking about creating the right type of culture through your leadership, where you grow people, where you help them to reach their potential and to create an environment where they can do that. So that's one, Good Authority by Jonathan Raymond. I also want to shout out another guest that I have coming on today. Leanne Davey wrote The Good Fight. It's a book about productive conflict, and it is remarkably full of value. I mean, like, the amount of like tactical like scripts and frameworks and ways of working through difficult conversations is incredible, and you should buy it. That's another one that if I could bundle it with my book, I absolutely would, because I think that it provides a lot of the tactical grounding that some of the theoretical ideas in the book really need. Now, my book is really focused on being tactical and giving you tools and frameworks, but I think The Good Fight really, I mean, it's basically like pouring gasoline on the fire. It's such an amazing book, so I'd highly recommend that. And then I had one more I wanted to say, but It is escaping me at the moment because I was just getting so excited about the books that I just said. Oh, The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. Uh, it's probably, I think it's the best selling coaching book of all time. And I think for anybody that's moving into a new manager's role, having this book in your arsenal is going to make you a better leader. No question. If you were to have that book and apply it through the lens of lovable leadership, you're going to have an amazing team experience. You're going to have an immense amount of trust. You're going to be able to help grow your people. It's just going to be phenomenal. So those are the books that I would recommend that I read after the fact, but I think are really amazing companion pieces. So just a reminder, if you haven't yet picked up your copy, please do. It's on Amazon, and that's where I would prefer you buy it, but really buy it anywhere. It's not going to be in local bookstores anytime soon because it's an online only edition at the moment, but I'm going to be calling those bookstores. And if you know one that would like to have it, or if you are a bookstore and would like to carry my book, please let me know about it. Happy to do it. Okay, so I want to read you something from the book as well, because I think this gives a little bit of context and clarity around why I wrote the book and what it's all about. So I'm going to read you a section from the book. It's not very long, so I'm not going to read the whole book to you, although an Audible version will be coming out. But this is called The Case for Doing Better, and it's part of the introduction of the book, which if you aren't ready to buy the book yet and you'd like to download the first chapter in the introduction, just to get a little flavor of it, to decide if it's for you, you can actually download the first chapter at lovableleader.com. It's right on the homepage there. You can download a preview. So I'm going to read you The Case for Doing Better, just a couple pieces from it. I have a strong opinion about the responsibility of leadership to make the world a better place. I want your team members to feel safe. I want you to actively reduce harm in every aspect of your leadership. I want you to appreciate your impact on other people and how your interactions can fundamentally reshape the world around you. I want you to finish this book with a default operating system that leads with others' best interest in mind. All of this can be accomplished without sacrificing results. Great leadership is a glorious balance held together by a deep understanding of what you're trying to accomplish, with the guidelines to ensure you honor the responsibilities of the role. Leadership is not an achievement nor a destination, but rather a practice that you will adopt for life. This is what lovable leadership is about. The aspects of leadership that require emotional intelligence, empathy, humility, compassion, and trust. Amid all of the other externalities, these are the things that we can control, how we relate to one another. Leaders who care for others and who can be trusted to lead into an uncertain future are a rarity these days. How often do you hear someone rave about what they do for a living? How often do they talk about how great their manager is? Even more rare, how often do you hear someone exclaim something like, I love my job and I trust my leadership completely? This is why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I want to help change the culture of work that I think is so very, very broken in so many ways. And I want us to enjoy going to work. I want us to feel like we have relationships that are valuable at work. I want us to feel like the work that we do matters. And all of these things that I'm feeling are not just me. They're not just the things that I'm feeling. If you look at, and I look at this stuff a lot, but if you go over to Gallup and you look at all of their employee engagement surveys, look the past 5 years. And you could say, oh, it's all millennials and Gen Z and they're entitled and blah, 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 blah. If you do, then please, I invite you to open your mind and think that it's more than that. We want to have a reason to go to work. We want to have some purpose in our lives. And what we're seeing is that the reason people leave, the top 3 reasons, I believe, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but in 2021, they did a survey. Why are people leaving? They didn't see opportunities for development. They didn't have good relationships at work, and they weren't clear on on what the company's purpose was. Purpose, relationships, and opportunities for growth. These are things that leaders can absolutely impact and affect. I think it was like something like 56% of people that left a job said that they think that their organization or manager could have done something to get them to stay. Think about that. We're in the midst of the great attrition and everybody's throwing up their hands trying to figure out what it is. The answer has been in front of us for like a decade. There's an expression, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. We have known this for a very long time. So what are we going to do about it? Are we going to keep searching around for the answer like it's not there? No, we have to do something about it. And I think it begins with creating environments where we have trust, where we have respect, where we have kindness, where we have, dare I say it, because I know this is not a very professional thing to say, but we need love. We need care for other people. Care, respect, kindness, trust. These are elements of love. These are things that you think about from people that you love. You have these elements in place. Why can't we have it at work? And I think the biggest reason is that our culture has put business before people. And I, for one, don't think that that's the best way for us to do this. I think we should be putting people before business, because business will come out of that. There's a lot of people will say this, and I would agree with it. I think Richard Branson even said this, and dude's a billionaire, so he must know something. But you put your employees first. Why do you put your employees first? Because if you take care of your employees, they're going to take care of the customer. The customer isn't first. The employee is first. So put your employees first, and they're going to take care of your people. So I'm going to give you, I only have about 10 minutes left before my first guest, Chris, gets here, who I am so excited to talk to as our kickoff event. Only a few more things left to talk about before I invite Chris in there. All of you who are watching, thank you so much. I really appreciate you all. I see you, Alex, and I see LinkedIn user who I can't tell who that is just because of the way that this comes up. But thank you for watching and joining my launch event. And I'm looking forward to all the other people that joined in as well. Share it far and wide, let the people know. Okay, so a couple big concepts from the book before we get started. I think this will actually really help to contextualize today's event and who I brought on and why. So a couple things. I want to start off first with the lovable leader mindset. So one of the things that I've come to realize as I've talked with leaders, as I coach people, as I talk with my wife almost every morning. Oh, hi, Yvonne. Amazing. Oh, and Chris. Amazing. Love you both. So glad you're both here. One of the things that I've noticed is that as I talk to leaders, that leaders know that this is hard. Being a leader is hard, especially when you deal with like situations where you've got someone who's super difficult and all you want to do is just like rip their head off because you think that they're wrong and you're reacting emotionally because you're a human being, right? But then you're like, I know that that's not the right way to actually build this relationship. I know that's not the best way to get this person to see the value of what we're doing. I know it's not the best way to grow this person. So like, you know, these things, but you have these emotional responses and it's difficult. And that's why I believe that leadership, the first lens of leadership is that leadership is a burden. It's difficult. You have to do more. You have to be the bigger person at times. You have to deal with situations that you quite frankly don't want to deal with. You have to deal with people who are not motivated and you have to motivate them. You have to deal with people who are so motivated that they're running over other people like a steamroller and you have to rein them in for the sake of the team. Like it's not easy. So the first lens of leadership is a burden. The second lens is, though, that leadership is a privilege, because if you have the opportunity to be at the table where you get to make decisions of consequence, where you get to be involved in decisions about maybe hiring and firing, this is a privilege to be in that position. It's also a privilege because when you're in a leadership role, people pay you deference. They listen to what you have to say. Now, in some cases, that's because of the implied authority that you have as a manager. People are going to listen to you because, well, maybe their job depends on it, their salary depends on it. And I think it's important not to leverage that, but to understand that that exists. That's a privilege of leadership, that you are higher in the hierarchy sometimes, and that by your position alone, by your title alone, sometimes you are given authority that other people don't have. You have a voice that other people may be clamoring to have. So it is a privilege and you should honor that. But part of the way that you honor your privilege is by trying to tear down any sort of systems that get in the way of other people not having a voice. And especially if the way that you got your manager role is a function of some other form of privilege, you know, whether it be, you know, relationships or your race, gender, ethnicity, any of that. If those things are part and parcel of how you got your role, then it should be incumbent upon you to use that position of privilege to tear down those systems that afford you that privilege so that everyone has an equal opportunity to join in and become leaders in that organization. So it's a privilege. That's the second thing. It's a burden and it's a privilege. And the third one, and this one is all about my guy right here, Spider-Man. It's a responsibility. If you are going to be a leader, you need to know that it is not a function of your title. It is a function of your choice. Leadership is a mindset. If you decide you are going to lead, I don't care if you are at the bottom of your org chart, you can lead. You can lead upward. And my man Alex, who's on the live stream right now, he talks a lot about role-based leaders, and it's something that I'm going to be talking about in the future at some point. But everybody has a role in which they are the leader, and it's context dependent. So leader isn't a singular position for one person in a team. Leadership is contextual based upon what's happening. So the point being is that leadership, if you feel the call to do it, if you feel like you want to be a leader, that's a decision. It's not a title. And if you feel it, that means that you know that it's your responsibility. You know that if you have the desire to go out and lead towards greater, bigger, more amazing things, you know that you can't not answer that call. And it's partly because there's two kind of, I don't even call them competing, but philosophies on the ethical right thing to do. There's deontology and teleological. Deontological and teleological. So deontological, to just to make it simple, is you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So it's about the intent. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That's a Spider-Man thing. With great power, there must also come great responsibility. And then there's teleological ethics, which is you do the right thing because the impact down the road is the right thing, even if in the beginning the initial decision seems wrong. That's Iron Man. That's Tony Stark. Build a suit of armor around the world, but it'll protect us in the end, right? So I believe in kind of blending these two things, but ultimately, I think if you feel like you have a calling to become a leader, it's your responsibility to do it. So when you're in the position where you're a leader, you're going to experience all three of those lenses. You're going to experience the fact that it's a responsibility, a burden, and a privilege. And it's going to bounce back in between all of those at any given time, because that is what it is to be a leader, is to experience those three lenses at any given time. And when you accept that, leadership's going to be a lot easier for you. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but when you expect that those are the three different types of experiences that you're going to have, three different ways of looking at leadership, the things that you wind up having to do make more sense. When you have to go into a tough conversation and you believe and you understand that it is a burden to have to do that, all of a sudden it makes more sense. You start to feel like, well, it does suck, but I have to do it because it's my responsibility. And because I have the privilege of leadership, I'm going to do this for the good of the team, for the good of my people, for the good of, my own future, whatever it is. You get a better sense of that leadership is at all times these three things. So I'm going to give you a couple more things. I only have 4 minutes until my first guest comes on, but couple of big concepts in the book, and this is what we're starting out the morning with. So the entire morning session is about these three things. These are the three pillars of lovable leadership: care, trust, safe travels. So here's what I mean by this. As a leader, here are the things that you have the ability to set as the context of everything that you do. Now, there's roles, there's responsibilities of leadership. So there's like goal setting, there's strategy, there's management, there's conflict resolution. Those are things that you have to do as a leader. They're sort of functions of the job, right? And then there's the sort of things that you have to do as a leader, like be in service of, be a cheerleader, be a coach. Like, you have all these different roles. But in terms of the pillars of lovable leadership, what I'm talking about here is care. Means that care is at the core of how you lead. You care about your people, you care about the work, you care about your organization, and you care about yourself. Care needs to be baked into every single thing. And we're going to be talking about this morning. We're also going to be talking about trust, because you cannot build a strong team without trust. Trust is about consistency. You build it over time, and it's about predictability. People need to know. They need to know on your team. They need to know that you know what you're talking about, that you have their best interest in mind, that you're going to come to support them and protect them when they need you. If you don't have that on a team, you don't have a team. You got a rabble band of people together that are working together for now. But if you have strong bonds of trust, that team will stay together like a family. And I'm using that term very, very carefully, because I'm not trying to tell you your team is a family. What I'm saying is familial bonds are the strongest we have, and those are built on love and care and trust. So trust is going to be the second piece of it. And then the third piece is safe travels. And I deliberately chose safe travels as the final one, because a leader's job is to go somewhere. It's to lead people somewhere. So that's the travels part. You have a destination and you need to get there. So a leader's job is to lead somewhere. If you don't have a destination, you're not a leader. You're maybe like you're a club. You have a hobby. Leaders take people places. So you have a destination, but what's important about that? If you were getting on a flight from New York to LA, it's not about getting on the plane. It's about getting off the plane in LA, right? Safely. That's the goal. It's not about the journey itself happening if you don't get to the end safely. So I believe that a leader's job is not just to set big, ambitious goals in the future, but make sure that the right people are on the team so that we all get there safely and we accomplish what we're trying to do. So safe travels is that third piece that I think is so essential, that actually brings the first two home. If you build a team on care and trust, and then you provide safety on the way to the destination, you're going to be in good shape. So those are the three pillars of lovable leadership. And I'm really excited for today. Really excited about the people that are on here. I'm just looking at some of the comments that are in here. Love all of you. Thank you so much. These are great comments. Throw some of them up on here in case anybody hasn't seen them. We all need loving kindness. People before profits, build it right, and then profitability surely come. Couldn't agree more. Privilege and weight indeed. We must always use this power and our superpower for good. Always. Love it, love it, love it. And Alex, thank you so much. John, good to see you, man. Good to see you. So my first guest, Chris Lynn, is going to be coming up in a minute. And I want to just kind of outline a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. That is across the day of the event. So I'm starting off with Chris. We're going to be talking about people first leadership. And that's really, in so many ways is what lovable leadership is about. It's about putting your people first and making that the core of what you do as a leader. So the first person I'm talking to for the first half hour is going to be Chris. Then we're going to take a quick little break. We'll then move to having my next guest at 10:15, Jeanette Brony. We're going to be talking about care, and we're going to go deep into what that means, both, care for your team, but also, care for yourself, creating an environment of care. So that's going to be really awesome. Then 10:45, Robin Dreek is going to be coming on, the man himself, the Code of Trust author. We're going to be talking about trust, and I'm really excited about that. Then at 11:15, I'm really excited. I'm going to share with you as people for my launch event. I'm actually going to share with you the most important, what I believe is the most important framework in the book. I'm like really big on like frameworks and really big on, processes and things like that. So like I use them as like mental shortcuts, mental models. So I'm going to share with you the most important framework in the book, which is called sitting on the same side of the table. It's why there's two chairs on the same side of a table on the cover of my book, because it's the most important framework in the book. And it's one that I use almost every single day. It's one that I coach people on constantly. If you follow this formula, it's going to work in a lot of different types of conversations. So I'm going to share that with you at 11:15. At 11:30, I have Jeff Harry coming on, and we're going to talk about safe travels. So that's pretty exciting. So that's going to be a good time. And then we're going to take a break for lunch, 12 to 1. 1 o'clock, I have Angela Chi coming on to talk about communication. At 1:30, I have Mark Pittman coming on to talk about goals and goal setting as a leader. At 2:15, this is an incredibly impactful and important one for me, but Jess Gengemi from formerly from my agency, like forever ago, is going to be coming onto the show to talk about strategy. And that's like, I'm going to try and keep it together at that point, but she's just gone on to become like such a rock star, and I'm so excited to talk to her. At 2:45, I have Leanne Davey coming on to talk about productive conflict. If you haven't read her book yet, please go and grab a copy. It's called The Good Fight. It's amazing. And then we have another little break, and then at 3:30, I have Celeste Headley coming on. She wrote a book called Do Nothing, and I read it twice last year. And part of my commitment for this year is to actually do less. The book's amazing. We're going to talk about balance and how, as a leader, you have to balance different things. Sometimes, like, being kind of like laissez-faire versus being a micromanager. Like, there's this balance that you have to strike as a leader, where you're doing, you have to kind of find a way of finding that middle ground. And sometimes you have to play in the extreme. So we're going to talk with Celeste about that. I am super excited. That is like an amazing get for me to have her on the show because wow, her book is so amazing. And then last speaker of the day I have coming on at 4 o'clock is Dr. George James. If you listen to my podcast, Shareable, I was actually on his podcast called Leapcast, which is leaders, entertainers, athletes, and performers. He talks about, mental health and things like that. We're both, he's actually with Council for Relationships, which is an organization I'm on the board of. And I'm really excited to have him come on the show. And that'll be the end of it. Then I'll do some closing remarks and all that. But let me just check to see if I have a note from Chris.